Wind moves through old metal and carries a low tone you can feel more than hear. A story lives in that sound, long before sand-covered streets and long before machines fell from the sky. People built a way out. They called it the Exodus. Those who remembered spoke of towers that vanished into cloud and engines that shook the ground. Centuries later, the launch towers still stand. Ruins mark their footprints across the Rust Belt and cast long shadows over a world that forgot their purpose. Near their bases, the ground hums with a faint vibration, like a breath that never fully releases. This story comes from what we know now from the in-game Codex and the discoveries made since the release of Ark Raiders. Together, they draw a clearer outline of what came before the machines. This video is built for listening. Treat it like an audiobook while you work, play, or unwind. Lean back, grab a drink, and let's dive in. Before the end, order held. After disaster came an age called Sunrise, a careful renewal where power returned to the grids and trade found its path between distant settlements. Rows of grow lights glowed near the Alcantara Dam, green pushed back against dust. Underground, workers carved early corridors that would one day link into the tubes. Above, markets reopened and machines returned to service that kept water clean and air moving. The balance was fragile. Each new advance pressed on an old scar, and weather patterns hardened. Storm lines lengthened, ground failed in places that once felt solid. Whispers gathered in the surviving cities. Work crews spoke of structures climbing past the haze. Not spires, not conduits, but launch frames. A plan began to take shape, built for scale and built to leave. What started as rumor became the last ambition of an era. The end crept in over years, unwinding certainty bit by bit. Storms tore coastlines, droughts emptied plains, cities yielded to dunes. Air grew heavy and water grew sour, a warning that the planet was closing its fist. People named that time the collapse. Murano, once a living port, disappeared beneath the sand and turned into a sealed archive of a world that couldn't hold. Other places followed until maps felt like memories. Survivors turned inwards and downwards into engineering and shelter. Fortified enclaves formed above. Below, crews widened the tubes and cut chambers that could feed, filter, and keep a steady breath. Hope settled into labor that didn't stop. On the horizon, metal frames climbed through haze, while refineries pulsed and test fires washed the night in white. Acceptance took the place of rumor. These structures existed to leave. Engines woke. Roars rolled across the Rust Belt as the first ships lifted through low cloud. Heat pressing against faces, while ash dried on lips. Crowds held the sight until each flame thinned to a point and vanished. No ledger survived to count how many rose or where they aimed. The towers kept their silence. Wind moved through their ribs with a faint hum that lives at the edge of memory. What followed is harder to trace. Acerra Spaceport carried the flow of movement and the strain of choices when capacity met need. Accounts point to crews close to the work, to health that could withstand a climb, to skills that kept closed systems alive. When the last fires dimmed, the surface quieted in a way colder than storm. Those who remained moved downwards through service shafts and half-lit galleries, following the tubes towards air, warmth, and time. Far below the bent steel of the old world, they assembled a city built to endure. They called it Toledo. Small traces still surface, a numbered panel fused by heat, a sealed cable run, a guidance stencil half buried near a tower base, Toledo keeps what it can and folds it into today's work. Toledo, a city joined by old service corridors and the wider tubes that once moved industry. People divided space into contradas, so each group could manage food, air, and power without stepping on the next. Speranza grew first, built into stable rock and older caverns. It became the center where decisions moved outwards through the districts. Celeste held ration lines steady and set rules that favored endurance. Food came from underground beds under hard white light. Grow teams recycled water, cleaned filters, and counted every seed twice. When harvests dipped, rations tightened and the lights stayed on. Security watched routes in and out. Operators at patchboard stations controlled the cargo elevators that returned teams without exposing the city. Supply call stations dropped crates for field teams. Arguments about waste ended when names survived that wouldn't have otherwise. Shani listened to scanners and tracked patterns through the tubes. Her scouts moved quietly because not every problem needed a fight. Tianwen kept a workshop near the piazza and built for endurance. Raiders brought parts back. Tools left her bench, ready to bite through machine plating. Lance ran a clinic with steady, exact hands. Burns from fireballs, wounds from ticks, the wear of long cycles. He set bones and returned people to the line. Training happened in the backyard, where the mountains broke signal. Turrets set for drills taught timing and cover. New raiders learned how hornets pivot and how to leave a fight with enough to run. Field depots pushed recovered crates down pneumatic lines into analysts' hands. Couriers and probes that failed in flight left salvage across the Rust Belt, and anything intact found its way to benches and ledgers below. Life settled into rhythm, work bells, dim cycles, the constant thrum of air through ducts. When the call came, teams rode the elevators up, crossed the dust, and came home with news in their pockets. Back to the monuments. They remain visible from miles away. Bracing and concrete rising above dust, taller than memory wants to hold. People call them launch towers, and even now they look ready to wake. Crews once climbed those frames in shifts that ran through the night. Weld lines ladder the steel. Service lines cling to the sides where lifts used to run. At the base, foundations open into chambers that once fed fuel, cooling, and the maze of conduits behind ascent. Near Acerra, ground tells the story in layers. You can trace a path from assembly yards to loading bays, then out to pads where engines turned sand into glass. Guide marks sit half-buried along service roads. Numbers in block letters that refuse to fade. Toledo keeps Fragments close. A flight connector now anchoring a power bus. A pressure door panel sealing a clinic room. A heat shield piece over a bench where new hands learn to fix old things. Not display. Use. The towers draw stories. Some hear a low hum when wind crosses the braces just right. Some see a faint glow in fog after nightfall that never repeats the same way. Whatever lived there belonged to a time that built for sky and left the ground to carry the weight. Field teams still find pieces. A resin set cable run, a pulsed ignition tag, a checklist panel etched in a font no one uses anymore. Analysts log each mark. Builders fold the past into new repairs. The towers set direction too. Raiders use them as landmarks when storms turn the world into one color. Shani's maps ring each tower to mark where open ground turns risky. No one carries a final manifest. What remains is the outline of an effort too large to forget and too broken to recover. Where the towers stand, voices lower without trying. The structures ask for that. Acerra sits where the ground runs flat enough to stage a climb. Long runways point the eye towards the horizon. Wind moves grit across concrete, but the layout still reads clean if you know the signs. Approach roads curve to the perimeter, past the empty posts. Service lanes feed hangars with doors tall enough to swallow tower segments. Crane rails cut the ceilings. Painted lanes frame cargo paths. Control faced the pads. Windows tilted inwards to kill glare. Console frames still anchor the floor. Power sockets march in tidy rows, and the labels speak to a system that cared about redundancy. The pads tell their own story. Engine scorch laid glass into soil. Tie-down rings keep their shape beneath sand. Guide marks set approach angles and safe zones. Every sign points to machines that demanded protection, and a perfect chain of steps. People moved through Acerra in waves. Crews who built, teams who fueled and measured, families carrying bags, small enough to lift fast. Lists lived in headsets, and on boards that went dark. Capacity and reach remain, in the scale of a door measured against a human stride. Toledo treats Acerra as a teacher. Raiders trace routes to learn the shape of evacuation at speed. Shani maps old cargo channels against current tube lines. In a storm, runways become a compass. Finds arrive at a steady pace. A regulator with intact seals. A connector that still mates cleanly. A pallet jack rebuilt from 2 frames. And a new axle. Nothing sits behind glass. Arc machines visit the open flats, as if the geometry draws them. Wasps hold the boundary. Couriers cut low and rise again. Whatever they sense, the effect is the same. Quiet entry, clean exit, no loitering when the wind shifts. A single plate remains, the most complete fragment. Painted fields, task columns, spaces for marks that once meant everything. Fuel ranges, release queues, crew confirmations. It rests on a bench where new hands learn why each step existed. Stand at runway midpoint and look along the line. Towers in the far distance cut the sky into measured pieces. You can imagine heat, sound, the brief daylight when engines lit the field, then the quiet that followed. What stayed behind to teach? The past returns in pieces that still do work. Analysts sort finds under steady light. Every bolt and wire gets logged, measured, and traced to a pattern if one exists. Matches go straight into service. A pressure ring from a launch line now seals a water main. A relay once used to gate fuel flow switches power between clinic bays. Heat-resistant sleeves cut failure in the cargo elevators, where friction punished older cable. Training rooms use relics as teachers. A checklist plate leans on a bench with fresh grease pencil marks explaining why each step matters. New raiders carry that cadence topside and count seconds between a snitch's call and the first wasp at altitude. Some finds speak more than they reveal. A guidance card with a partial map. A timer plate, heat darkened at the edges. A coil stamped with a serial that stops mid-sequence. They don't confirm destinations. They confirm scale. Field depots keep the stream steady. Crates hiss into the room through old pneumatics, stock from launch years beside stock from arc years, labelled by hand. Shani tracks flow against weather and patrol timing until routes emerge. Acerra remains the richest ground, protected panels and lockers sealed by grit. Each visit adds a detail to a story that resists a clean ending. Some fragments wait on high shelves, patient for the diagram that ties them to function. When that match arrives, mystery moves to maintenance, and a small gap closes. Underground, these pieces keep systems alive and keep the Exodus present, not as legend, as solutions. The launches ended. Silence filled the gaps they left, and the surface settled into a slower ruin. Underground, Toledo learned steady days, filters humming, pumps ticking, Small routines becoming a way to live. New weld dates appeared on hatch plates. Children learned call and response for power and air. Then arc swept across scanners. Machines fell from orbit. People named the first surge, the first wave. Early units were simpler than what raids see now, but they pressed work sites, locked routes, and turned open ground into fields that punished movement. West of the Alcantara Dam, Victory Ridge wrote a lesson in rock. Raiders held lines from height. The surge broke. Time passed. Toledo grew inwards and outwards along the tubes. Then Arc returned, with better coordination and harder armor. The second wave. Queens held extraction. Bombardiers synced with spotters. Smaller units split ranks and held angles that used to feel safe. The Exodus lingered as a measure, a standard for checklists, for steps that forgive fewer mistakes than anyone likes, for fragments turned into tools. Towers launched ships, but names rarely stayed with them. Manifests burned, records scattered. Stories carried what they could, a surname matching a crate stamp, an insignia seen twice in different districts, a penciled note listing a time and a pad number. Acerra shows capacity and discipline. The towers show scale. Together they tell of many who reached the pads and passed checks. How many crossed the cloud line slips away. Toledo keeps the rest in conversation. Families remember relatives who worked valves, relays, lifts. Some recall a promise to signal back when orbit felt safe. No reply reached these tunnels. What left changed the ground it rose from. Teams who stayed took procedures and patience, and used them to build downwards instead of upwards. Sometimes a field team brings back something personal, a tag with a scratched initial, a fabric band that survived in shade. These prove preparation and the weight of leaving. If anyone reached a station beyond the sky, their words never reached this city. Maybe storms killed signals, maybe the messages were never sent. The towers keep their silence. Work continues under it. The Exodus lives inside daily work, as a habit that refuses to fade. In training halls, new raiders learn checklists before shorthand. They practice call and response for power, air, and seals, the cadence that once kept pads safe at Acerra. Instructors trace a finger across old plates and explain why a step exists and what fails when it's skipped. Shani's maps carry the same discipline. Routes sit layered with weather, sightlines, and patrol rhythm. A line drawn along a runway marks a safe bearing when sand turns the world into one color. Nothing on those boards asks for luck. Workshops hold memory in metal. A relay with a launch-era stamp clicks inside a distribution box. Sleeved cables glide where elevators rub. A pressure ring seals a pipe that feeds a greenhouse below the piazza. In Lance's clinic, a door panel from Pad C still latches with a clean sound. The city teaches by doing. A class traces airflow diagrams, then swaps a filter at the end of the lesson. On another day, they follow a tube line between contradas, naming junctions aloud until the path lives in memory. Not every trace is useful. Some fragments sit labeled until a match appears. Then they move from shelf to service, and the city gains another quiet improvement. Arc moves through this landscape with its own rhythm. Wasps ride altitude over flats. Snitches pull attention. Bombardiers track through cover. Field teams answer with timing and angles, learned from systems built to survive stress. The Exodus shaped that language. The city speaks it under pressure. Stand beneath a tower on a calm day and listen. Wind turns braces into an instrument that never repeats the same note. Walk the edge of a glassed pad at dusk, and you'll see faint waves in the melt. These moments guide a step more than they prove a point. Progress shows without ceremony. A pump runs clean through a cycle. A hatch seals with 2 fingers. A map shortens a route by 10 minutes. When the storm line shifts, small gains add into margins that hold. Debates end with numbers. If a crate patch keeps a rail open, Celeste signs even when budgets strain. Choices favour function and time saved. At day's end, lights dim and the tunnels hold a steady cool. Somewhere above, towers mark the sky. Somewhere below, a mechanic writes a gauge number that matches one written decades ago. Between those points runs the thread that holds this world together. The Exodus began as a plan to leave. Its legacy is a way to stay. Receivers sit in a neat line under a bank of timers. Cables climb a shaft to a mast that rides the tube like a spine. When storms pass, static thins. The city leans closer to the noise, while meters tick and no one speaks. The habit started after the launches. Antennas moved below ground as the surface turned hostile. The work shifted from calling outwards to patient logging, hours marked, and anomalies traced until they proved mundane. Most of what they catch belongs to ARC, bursts of drone chatter and sweeps that match courier passes. Patterns repeat. Shani reads them the way a mechanic reads a bearing. Some days bring echoes that don't fit, a wideband swell, or a narrow tone that slides and holds. Logs keep time, weather, and patrol positions because context turns noise into data. Later, a similar trace might stack against those pages. No one claims to have heard a voice. They hear storms, machines, and their own metal answering back. The search learned patience. Towers help most. Steel shapes radio fields in ways that repeat. A lee-side step can quiet static enough to set bearings when the world turns white. Training units work with weak signal near a pad. Operators call bearings. Raiders move until the tone sharpens, then note angle and distance. It reads like search and teaches return. Receivers also pull in the human world, short bursts from settlements that never traded names. Sometimes a single word repeats until the battery dies. Sometimes a parts list reads slow and starts again. Celeste answers with position, time, and what the city can spare. If a path looks safe, a team moves. Acerra is where silence feels loudest. Set a small set on old console frames, and the room gathers every faint tone. Wind through metal, far rhythms along boundary roads, and the outline of a climb that ended. A few watch for light instead of sound. On rare evenings, a glow moves along a brace like current. Meters say weather. The record stays anyway, because the work is to note and let patterns declare themselves. ARC owns the sky between towers often enough that masts come down when patrols tighten. Listening resumes when risk eases. The habit persists because it costs less than giving it up. Relays improve clinic lights. Insulators cut crackle on a security line. Even weeks of machine chatter add small gains to daily life. If a message arrives, Toledo is ready. Shani keeps a table with plain words: identify, position, condition, intent. No speeches, just enough to help. Until then, receivers hum, maps gather pencil marks, and workshops turn fragments into tools that shave another notch off the hiss. ARC patrols trace wide circles around towers and the flats near Acerra. Wasps hold altitude along long sight lines. Snitches fix on movement. Bombardiers place fire where cover looks safe, until it isn't. Closer to structure, ticks wait in shade. Hornets skim rails that once fed cargo. Relic sites change the rules. Wind along a tower leg turns whispers into cues. A tone shift can warn when a wasp drops below the line. Glass pad melt hides a ridge that catches boots, so roots skirt the center. Hangar doors echo. Openings stay narrow. Shani rings each tower on the board and threads lines towards exits that hold in weather. Training covers these specifics, so a team acts without debate. Field depots keep the loop alive. Crates from couriers and probes carry parts that teach how the net breathes, and parts from the launch age that still solve problems. Neither source cares about story, both matter to the work. The backyard turns skill into habit, under controlled noise. Timing, pivots, and that first step, when trouble starts, drilled until motion wastes nothing. The relics do more than anchor routes. They remind people why rules exist. A straight ladder, a clean label, a tie-down ring that still won't bend. Arc pushes with tighter rhythm. Queens hold extraction. Bombardiers sync with spotters and place shots through cover. Snitches pull attention and break formations. Toledo answers with process. Shani revises the master routes each cycle, a protocol that forces 2 independent checks before updates hit the boards. Security hides elevator signals inside noise. The city understands. Backyard drills keep timing quiet and exact. Field depots keep parts and data flowing. What works today goes to benches. What needs time sits labeled until a match appears. Every return writes another mark that shortens tomorrow's risk. The second wave pushes harder each month. The city stacks patient layers and measures survival in cycles that add into years. Now, the hands that hold the line, the human network. Celeste. Order lives in her voice. She ends conflicts at the table, tightens rations only when numbers demand, and signs for repairs that save minutes on exits. Shani. Maps, receivers, and patterns. She reads the space between patrols and sends teams when the line opens. Tianwen. Steel, solvent, clean cuts. She builds for endurance and teaches by example. Steel becomes habit in the hands that return from the backyard. Lance. Steady hands. Steady room. He returns people to the line with quiet care. Apollo. Energy that turns sparks into tools. He tests until a fix holds, and he stands where things fail first. Together, they make the mesh that keeps messages clean, repairs timely, and shifts starting with lights that stay on. The Exodus left more than towers. It left a way to think. Checklists on walls keep teams calm when seconds feel thin. Routes carry contingencies, so one closed door doesn't end a run. Fragments become tools. Nothing sits idle if it can carry weight. Underground, air moves, water circulates, power cycles without a hitch. Topside, teams read terrain with the same care once given to gauges at Acerra. The city's edge comes from small, repeatable wins that stack like layers of rock. That is what endures. I keep coming back to the same feeling. This world reaches further than what we see on a map. The towers, the runways, the fragments on a workbench. They point towards a history that still moves under our feet. A few questions stay with me. Did anyone make it past the storms and build a place where people could breathe without counting filters? If a signal ever comes through, what changes first, the city below or the ground above? What part of the Exodus is still working today without anyone noticing? And if Ark is following patterns we haven't read yet, what are they moving us towards? To everyone who already joined the Discord, thank you. The first wave of members helped shape the tone of this project. We're slowly building a community. If you want more videos like this, or a place to swap ideas, form groups, and maybe even find a few friends, you're invited. Come say hi. I'd love to hear how this one landed. Tell me what worked for you, where the pace should change, and what part you want to hear more about next. Drop a comment below. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Both help me steer this series in the right direction. Hit subscribe if you want to see and hear more lore videos like this one. I might cover other games in the future as well, and I'd love you to come with me on this journey. So, thank you for spending your time here, and I'll see you in the next video.